All right, so here we are, Sacred Birth and Mothering Series of Talks, Episode 1, Why Birth Matters. So before we start, I just wanted to do an acknowledgement of country and to the Indigenous people and all kindred, past, present and emerging, on the land on which we all stand on tonight. We come from a place of love and honour for all. And I just wanted to give a special shout out to all the people who are protecting the birthing trees up in Western Victoria at the moment. And I wanted to thank and acknowledge the Australian College of Midwives, who sent a letter to the Victorian government today supporting those people who are on the land, protecting the trees, and I guess pointing their point of view that that was inappropriate to consider putting a road through it. So, and just light a candle. I just wanted to light a candle to all the mothers and the babies and all those who are supporting them today. And may they all feel empowered, loved, safe and held, which is what we're all here to talk about tonight.
Ashe.
Ashe. So my name is Evonne Wildheart. I'm a mother of 4 young ones, Shamanic Craftswoman, priestess of transformation and transition, student and teacher of women's mysteries. My co-host is Marie-Louise Lapeyre, mother, grandmother, Shamanic Craftswoman, Ancestral Healing guide. Welcome, Louise, Marie-Louise.
Hi. Glad to be here.
Yay. And we're deeply honoured to be joined tonight by a special guest, Jane Hardwicke Collings, mother, grandmother, midwife, author, teacher of women's mysteries and creatrix of the School of Shamanic Womancraft. Good afternoon or good evening, dear Jane. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Evonne, and thank you, Marie-Louise. It's a great honour, and I just want to say thank you for doing this. It's really an important thing to be able to have the energy and effort and willingness to create a platform where these kind of conversations can happen. So thanks for doing this.
Absolutely, our pleasure. So I guess tonight, being our first episode, we really wanted to hone in, why would we even worry about birth, and why birth matters. So I just wanted to throw to you, Jane, first of all, and to hear what you think why birth matters.
Yeah, well, what a sad state of affairs that even needs to be asked. Why does birth matter? And the same question is being asked about menstruation now and menopause. And, funny that they're all connected, obviously. And, we wondered whether the earth mattered, whether the forests mattered, whether the oceans mattered. And, whoops, we're seeing how much they do. So it's all connected, something, and yes, birth matters. So I've got lots of things to say about why birth matters, and particularly want to say about the effects of birth. They are the reasons why birth matters. So shall I talk about rites of passage and things like that, or do you want to?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So birth is a rite of passage. So we know what rites of passage are, and they're not new ideas. They're ancient ceremonies, pan-cultural, across cultures. There are rites of passage that mark great moments of transformation in a person's life. So there are cultural rites of passage like marriage, graduation, even first day at school, things like that. And then there are what are more physical rites of passage, and these are called the women's mysteries and sometimes even the blood mysteries. And these are the transformative moments or periods of time, more likely, that we transform from one aspect of ourselves into another. So rites of passage in the blood mysteries or the women's mysteries are birth. So one is born, and then our menarche or our first period. And for boys, that would be puberty. And then the next big rite of passage for women is birth. So pregnancy, conception, pregnancy, and birth. And that's a rite of passage into motherhood. So menarche is a rite of passage into womanhood, childbirth, or actually every pregnancy results in a birth. So whatever happens is the birth. So every pregnancy and the resulting birth is the rite of passage into motherhood. And then menopause, the next big one in the blood mysteries, is the rite of passage to our wise woman years. And then finally death. So the reason to mention in answer to the question of why birth matters and then speak about rites of passage is to say that what happens at a rite of passage, whatever happens at a rite of passage, and even if you don't honor the rite of passage, what happens is the rite of passage. Whatever happens or doesn't happen, whatever is said or not said, teaches the person going through the rite of passage, so in the case of childbirth, the mother, whatever happens teaches her on a subliminal level, which means she doesn't even know she's being taught, how her culture values the next role she's going into, so in this case mother, as I said, and therefore through the enculturation, which is just a nice way of saying brainwashing, of the effects of what's said or not said, done or not done, she learns how she is supposed to behave as a mother to be accepted by the culture. So that's what happens at a rite of passage, and that's why, you know, one of the big reasons birth matters so much is it is a transformative process that teaches mothers how to behave. Now, all we have to do is look at the statistics of the dominant practices around birth in our modern Western world to see what sorts of things women are being taught in terms of how they should behave. So, or how they should think, because rites of passage create and reinforce culture. So they reinforce culture on the outside by gathering people together to behave in the way that the culture wants them to. And they create and reinforce culture on the inside, which is through the mindset, the attitudes, the beliefs, and the fears that the experience creates. So the thing about that is that how a mother is treated and how she negotiates the birth process will teach her something about herself and the way of things. So birth matters in that respect because what the mother learns about herself is what she takes into mothering. And mostly women take less than positive experiences from the most dominant way that babies are born these days as a teaching, like particularly when you look at the statistics, and 1 in 3 or 4 women are being induced. So they begin their birth, the birth process, and their experience of being a mother of 1, 2, 3, however many, by knowing first up that their body doesn't work. Their body doesn't go into labor at the date that is told to her is the safe date or the right time, etc. So there is an example of one of the ways that the birth process affects the mother by the beliefs that her experience set up for her around her body, and how a woman gives birth choreographs her mothering. And so that's another reason why it matters, because it affects so many people and forever, you know, like, so it affects the mother, obviously, and how she will mother and how she'll feel about herself and her body, and therefore how she'll care for herself and her baby or not. And it affects the baby. How a baby is born, how a person is born, sets up their whole life. And we know that. We all experience our birth, like, all the time in the way that it is our imprint for the birth process or the creative act. So that's one of the things that we do in the School of Shamanic Womancraft to start off the 4 Seasons journey. At the opening gathering, all the women make a frame drum, which is just a very basic drum that women have been playing forever, that and the women come into the process with as much information as they can have gathered before about how they were actually born, and then they work with the repeating pattern that they've actually recognize has been going on probably, every 10 minutes every day of their life. And it helps us to be able to identify that pattern and then work with it, because our rites of passage affect us, as I'm saying, but they're not a curse. They're actually an opportunity. And if we look at our rites of passage, one leads to the next, like everything else in the world. If we look at our rites of passage, we can see what the kind of ongoing theme is that's playing out in our rites of passage. And in seeing that and identifying that, we get some clues about what might play out in our next rite of passage, whether that's another baby coming or a creative act of some sort, or in menopause. And so we can also identify not just the theme of the lessons of our life, so to speak, but also wrapped up in that is our life purpose, as we fulfill that epic sort of figure eight thing that happens of being able to help others who have had similar experiences. So birth matters so much, and as a rite of passage, it has huge effects, as I mentioned, and it's going to affect everybody in the family, and probably the birth workers who've had anything to do with it as well, forever. So that's a long answer.
It's so good. Yeah, so many things there. I'm just thinking of how women at the moment, it seems like there's a good girl syndrome going into labour, and I'm just wondering how that would play out in motherhood as well. And knowing my experience, the life purpose, and having the wounding of my personal birth and seeing it played out with my births and my children, and working through that through the School of Shamanic Womancraft 4 Seasons journey multiple times, and just really coming to that, seeing the fullness of the life purpose, which is really interesting. Marie-Louise, what's your thoughts on why birth matters?
I agree with every word that Jane said, and that was part of the points that I had written. Absolutely. But I also think that birth matters because it is the foundation of love and attachment. And so that's where women learn to totally care for the baby, and the baby can trust that there'll be someone there for them completely. And if that is not there, then there is a whole lot of things that I've set in place about the non-trusting of life and the non-trusting that of the people's purpose in many ways. I also think that birth can heal. So because when birth happens, it is such a sacred place, and there's such amazing doors that can open if birth is undisturbed, and so much healing can happen for the whole family. I've just been to 2 births in 2 days, and both births were second babies, and I could really see on reflection with the woman and the father how much was healed with the birth of the second baby, because they were undisturbed, and because they were treated with respect, because the women were listened to, because the normal physiology was not disrupted. And so the flow of life took the family through the healing that was needed.
And the healing of, for the ancestral lineage going back and forward, I think, during that time. So, how trauma gets passed down through the body and through birth. And,
yes.
And then, once we do get to a point of healing that, for the great-grandchildren coming through.
Yes, and another thing is that we can look at the babies as our ancestors coming back and deserving a great deal of respect. Yeah, and like you said, it is true that the trauma that happens in family accumulates. So when there is trauma that happens in birth, it can be seen as the accumulation of generation upon generation upon generation of colonization and trauma to women and babies and families, and the trauma of many different things.
Yeah.
But also trust in the birth process. Jane, you always talk about that, trust in the birth. You always have the birth that you're meant to have.
Yeah, I've seen that over and over, and I've personally experienced it. And I think it's a process for a woman to understand how that is the case for her in each situation of giving birth. But, you know, the thing I say is that you have the birth you need to have to teach you what you need to learn about yourself to take you to the next place on your journey to wholeness. Now, you know, that's quite a big thing to say, and quite a process for each woman to find the thing that the birth holds as the gift. And that's the point, to find the gift, the teaching of the experience. And like Marie-Louise said, the healing opportunity that's there, and like you're saying, Evonne, about the way that birth gets passed, but trauma gets passed on from generation to generation, and one of the places it plays out, well, are the rites of passage, because that's where the transformation happens. So one of the big questions that I always ask at the workshops that I give, and which both of you give as well as teachers of the School of Shamanic Womancraft, Shamanic Dimensions of Pregnancy workshop, is how do the women in your family give birth? And that simple question holds the clues to what the red thread or mother line or generational trauma could be ready to play out again. And one of the things I realized over the years is, you know, back in the day, so when my mother was born, so if she was alive now, she'd be kind of late 80s. She was born, and her brother, as 3-day labors. So, you know, like back in the day, that was a thing, whereas now it would be a cesarean after 24 hours, for example. So it might not look the same, but it may have a similar energy. And also I just wanted to say, besides all of the things about why birth matters, if you, you know, looking at the rite of passage and the imprinting and all that, but it is the time in a woman's life, in her birthing experiences, when she's going to experience a peak of oxytocin, like a level of oxytocin, which is the hormone of love, that she won't ever experience ever again, or ever at all, unless, as she has what Marie-Louise was talking about before, an undisturbed birth. So I think that, you know, if we look at how the process, and yes, to trust the process, and how the process is kind of the blueprint of it, or how it's designed, so to speak, is that mothers have a peak experience and of transformation, but also of oxytocin, and also transcendental, like the altered state of consciousness that women can achieve or access during an undisturbed birth is what so many people are trying to replicate in so many different ways all around the planet every day, you know, like that level of transcendence, that touching the goddess energy, becoming part of the force. Like, what a terrible thing to rob women of, you know. And I've seen, as many midwives have, that when a woman gives birth under her own steam, and she's there and she's like, whoa, if I could do that, I can do anything, which is perfect, because that's the job description for mother. Do anything. So, you know, like when we mess with it, when we mess with the process, when we don't trust the process, then we fiddle, then we get in the way of the experience that is there for women to have, that would set them up in such a beautiful way for motherhood. Now, having said all of that, if something happens and we need medical help, then we give great thanks for that. So it's not about avoiding medical help or rejecting it or anything like that. It's the way the question, does birth matter, shows up in most women's experience is in the thinking that the only thing that does matter, and it's said so many times, all that matters is that there's a healthy baby. And, you know, like, it's not the only thing that matters.
A live baby, isn't it?
Yeah, okay, well, yeah, a live baby, not even healthy, yeah. So the fact that that is held up as the reason why things need to be done or not need to be done, or like, it's showing the priority of the service providers or the caregivers there, that if those who say that, like, no, pretty outrageous thing to say, but I have heard mothers say that, you know, in a way to be able to let go probably of any attachment to any particular outcome, and just know that, you know, the only thing that matters is a healthy baby. So we know that that's not the only thing that matters, and we know the effects that that kind of statement has on women, because it kind of implies that they don't matter, which is so not the case.
And I think, going on from that, one of the other reason why birth matters so much is that when women don't get to that peak oxytocin transformation, there's a level of depression that can happen after the birth. And in Australia, I believe that the rate of death for mothers is the highest from suicide after the birth. And I would say that whether women know it or not, they have been robbed of something really, really precious in their life. And I also see that the lack of consent that happens in birth, where a lot of things happen despite women wanting something else, is very much a reflection of the culture at large, where when you were talking about the birthing tree, like, there is a lack of consent from our environment of what we do to it,
and
disconnection from the relationship. So that there's a disconnection from the relationship with the trees and with the rivers and with the ocean and with the air, and there's a disconnection with the birthing woman and what her intuition and what she wants and where she wants to go with it. And a forcefulness that is replicated everywhere in life and in our culture.
It feels like a rare thing that a mother would be, you know, as you would say, you know, like, you think of a home birth and where the mother is honoured and she has, you know, the empowerment that she has. It feels like a very rare thing these days for women to experience that. Maybe could you talk us to what is the standard or the norm for women who are birthing in Australia at the moment?
Well, the norm seems to be that there is policies and procedures, and women are made to fit the policies and procedures that are often benefit the hospital and the insurance companies more than, it's a hard thing to say but it's true that they benefit more the insurance companies and the hospitals, and protects the hospital more than the women and the babies.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I've heard you, Jane, say, you know, the people in the hospitals and the insurance companies believe it's the right thing to do. Like, they fully are committed to, you know, what they stand by, thinking it's the best thing.
Yes, I don't think that any of the people who dedicate their lives to this field, you know, like medical practitioners and midwives and, you know, specialists, I don't think that they think that I don't think that any of them think they're doing anything wrong. I think that they believe in what they do, and I honour them for that. You know, I think what we see in this whole birth environment is, you mentioned it before about the good girls, and I think what we see in this birthing environment is what's called the cult of the expert. And it's not just in the birthing environment that the cult of the expert is the thing, it's everywhere. And so that's another clue. Like, what's going on in birth is actually happening in most industries. You know, the disrespect of the nature of things. Like, think about agriculture, think about how children are educated. You know, like, all the same problems are happening in all of these big sort of fields, and that's because this is what happens in a patriarchal culture. This is it, the cult of the expert and the power over model, and people are waking up to it and wishing it wasn't that way. And we see that in birth, and thank goodness that we see that in birth, because what happens in birth often, when there's a traumatic experience for a mother, often she will ask of the experience later, like, why did that happen? What is this about? Why did this happen to me? And that's the best question for her to be asking. And the first thing that she could probably begin to ask herself in answer to that is something like, is this a familiar feeling? Have I ever felt like this before? And most likely what happens in that kind of internal questioning is that she sees that there's a bit of a pattern that's going on in her life that plays out in her rites of passage, like it does in every other rite of passage for every other person. And the other big piece about that is that how birth is playing out is really it's the same as how all the other feminine things are going on. I mean, look at the attitudes and the way menstruation is handled and not handled. And it's no surprise that birth is the way it is when girls are initiated into womanhood at menarche and mostly taught and about menstrual shame. And menstrual shame is reinforced through our culture's dominant perspective about menstruation. Although I do love the new Libra pad ad. That is so awesome, with red blood instead of blue blood. Anyway, so like the connection between an individual and individuals and a culture's attitudes to menstruation is just what then ends up playing out in birth. Like, menstrual shame leads to body shame, which leads to low self-esteem and no confidence in your body. And then she shows up to have her baby, like, fully aware that her body, is an unpredictable, painful, shameful source for her. So, I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but not really.
No. And then I feel that how it plays out in motherhood is, and they're not trusting your baby's body, when it has fevers and things like that. And, all the painkiller ads at the moment for babies that happen to go on at 10 o'clock in the evening when most mothers are up with their sick kids.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was my observation when I was with, my babies at that time. Yeah.
Dodgy.
It feels, that, as you said, that connection to how you birth is how informs you of how you're mothering. That's a big thread there. Yeah,
and that's not a curse, as I said before. Like, there's so much healing, like Marie-Louise said, that and available to everybody, about everything, of course. It requires a level of self-awareness and witness perspective, and the kind of like the internal safety to go in that deep and ask these questions, and then the support from people who can support others to unravel the experience and find the gold. There's lots of, there's gold is found in the darkest places, and where you stumble, there your treasure lay. So these experiences that we have that feel traumatic or are traumatic or, at the least very challenging, hold within them so much information for us about the next piece in our story, or the next piece in our puzzle, or anything like that. So yeah,
and often it starts women asking really important questions for the next birth or the next all the decision making that they have to make afterwards.
What kind of questions would they be, Marie-Louise?
Well, is that necessary?
Yeah.
That's really what happens if we just wait, or what happens if we do nothing? I mean, in emergencies, of course, you want people to act quickly, and people do, but a lot of the time there is no need to do anything, actually. There is time to wait and time. It's one of the things that, the first thing that a midwife has to learn doing home birth.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Anything else either of you would like to add?
Well, there's another lovely one-liner that feels as relevant now as it was when she coined the phrase. My teacher and the lineage that the School of Shamanic Womancraft represents, Jane Hardwicke Collings, her beautiful little line, heal the earth one birth at a time. So as relevant back then when she said it a couple, 20 or 30 years ago, but super relevant now, like we absolutely know that positive intervention can be done at our rites of passage, particularly menarche and particularly birth. So if we focus on birth as being the beginning of someone's life, and that whatever happens is going to set them up basically for the rest of their lives, then our focus ought to be on having that be as gentle as possible and as kind, not as possible, like just completely kind and completely gentle, not gentle as possible. I shouldn't have said that. Gentle and kind, respectful, and no matter what. And then that at least is going to be the, part of the initial energy that ends up being the story for the mother and the baby and everybody else that comes into their orbit. So healing the earth one birth at a time is something that I think is really important to remember.
I feel that that's really important, because I think as birth workers and people who are around birth, it can be easily overwhelming when you hear, what sort of happens to most women. And that one birth at a time is like, there's just one. Oh, great, that's one. Fantastic. Feels really good.
And also, like, in helping the mothers, that they actually only have to have one contraction at a time.
Yeah.
So just having a look at the notes the other really important thing, I think, like, it's kind of obvious but not to everybody perhaps, that babies are sentient beings. They're not like unconscious and not formed properly yet. They are sentient beings from probably conception on, and they feel everything that the mother feels during their experience of pregnancy together, and they are listening and hearing and learning everything that goes on around them. So that's another piece of information or level of awareness that we need to bring to the process, because the babies are not just blobs that can't hear or anything. They're taking in everything, and that's just one little way we can help that baby in its beginning and therefore development, is to be treating it like you would treat any other person, like fully respectfully, kindly and gently.
And it's not because they don't have language that they don't have memory. They have actually what is called implicit memory. When you have language, you end up with what is called explicit memory. When you have language, you have explicit memory because you can explain what you remember. But when you don't have language, you have implicit memory, which is a memory that is stored in the body.
Mm. And I feel like going back to what you said, Marie-Louise, about oxytocin and how the highest point in a woman's life, and baby, I guess, especially if it's a male, the highest point can be experienced at birth, the oxytocin of the love hormone. And so if we deny, we give a mama a syntocin and blockages, that also is blocking the oxytocin, that hormone of love for that baby as well. So the experience of the mama is also the experience of the baby that carries through that memory in the body.
And it's really important from what you say, Jane, also, that if you see the baby as being exquisitely sensitive, then you actually have to acknowledge that babies can have birth trauma.
Yeah.
And that is really, really important. And another reason to treat the mother really, really gently and with respect and kindness, so that the baby receives that as well.
Yeah. I feel like they're going to need the babies who are coming through now as we move into where we are with the earth. We're going to need all that love and kindness to start with.
Yeah. Someone said it's not the survival of the fittest, it's the survival of the nurtured. The people who have been nurtured have a knowledge that other people don't.
Yeah.
And that can use parts of their brains that other people can't.
Amazing. Any other thing to add to that?
Well, I think also maybe just that it's not just about the birth either, that the pregnancy and the postnatal period are, this sort of giant kind of year and a half bubble that we as other humans really need to be watching over and preserving and keeping sacred the whole time, from pregnancy and however long it takes for the mother to emerge again from the bubble. And that it takes a village to raise a child and a community to hold the mother to be able to look after the baby, and that the way our villages are set up now is not like that, and to our total detriment, that mothers are looking after babies in isolated situations without enough support, and that could easily change and needs to.
Yeah, it feels like what you said, Marie-Louise, about that statistic about the highest death rate of mothers after giving birth is suicide. Yeah. I wonder in today's society how we can promote that support, or what can we do? I feel because we live in such a busy culture that people, especially mothers, feel like they're being pushed back to work by the machine, and the babies are off at daycare from really early ages, and I feel I get quite overwhelmed by it, because I don't, how, in my head, what does it even look like to have a culture that supports the mamas and the babies in that nurturing space?
I think it's really a sign of how sick we are that we don't.
Yeah, totally agree.
But also teaching women to question things. I think that's really, really important. That, like you say, Jane, that women who are really powerful in their birth, they're going to make different decisions than the women who are subservient and obey and are traumatized with or without knowing it. And in saying all of that.
So I was just going to say, it's a clue, like the way that birth is feared and the way that birth is controlled and managed, because it's one of the most powerful times of a woman's life. Much easier to have that controlled and birth feared than to have all these wild women taking over and saying, you mean what? You know, I think what's required to deal with the situation at hand is a paradigm shift, a revolution, a revolution.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I feel we're in the early stages of, you know, this revolution and the shift in the paradigm.
And hopefully what we're witnessing in so many different ways around the planet right now, and particularly in the birth industry and in the way that, in all the things that are happening. What I think what this all is the death throes of the patriarchy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, people, you know, and I think of women stepping up and taking full responsibility and, you know, questioning things and saying, you know, I've got to take responsibility for my own body and the way I'm treated, and is that okay with me, and that you do that, or, you know, that's stepping up and taking full responsibility. And I think that's, you know, when we talk about rites of passage with, you know, that step into motherhood is about stepping into full adulthood. And, you know, Bill Plockton talks a lot about that, and taking full responsibility and being fully responsible adults, which is the rite of passage into motherhood.
And into fatherhood too.
Yeah, in the fatherhood, absolutely.
As the protector of the family, and the questioning of authority, and saying, are you sure you want to do this to my wife?
Yeah.
Or to my partner, or yeah.
One of the other places that I think that needs to have women take responsibility for themselves, that will then have a big flow-on effect with birth, is around contraception. You know, so we so often just hand over our fertility to the establishment, to big pharma, to the medical fraternity to manage, and then, you know, same with birth. So if we could reclaim our fertility, which is basically our menstrual cycle as well, then everything would change.
Ashe. Yeah, it feels,
and so much bad stuff's coming out about contraception now, you know, like I just saw something yesterday, about the Depo-Provera injection is associated with increased transmission of HIV. So lots of dodgy stuff coming out now.
Yeah. In like, for example, the pill, doesn't it shut off over like 100 mechanisms of the body and things like that?
150 actually. Yeah, it's, I think, and one of the most shocking ones that when women hear it is so disappointing is that when you're on the pill, which is used for so many things that are beyond contraception too, as we know, that when you're on the pill, you're attracted to men that you wouldn't be attracted to if you were on the pill.
The pheromones change. Yeah.
That's so sad.
It's so sad. And all those young women who, you know, as you said, go on the pill for acne and other reasons besides contraception. And that's when, you know, I feel like that's when the pill is the biggest sort of inroad happens in those young women who've gone through their menarche and, you know, starting to explore their sexuality. And the pill feels like the first stop for a lot of young women.
So many.
Yeah,
it's tragic.
And
there are some women for whom the pill is really liberating, and you know, that's wonderful as well. But I think with everything that around our health and our bodies, everything, we need to be making informed decisions around our care. Like, you know, what we're saying about birth is that necessary? You know, like, is there any point in that? Like, surely it's easy enough to wake up to things like that around birth and contraception. And, you know, like, I just think that women have been kept in the dark for so long around all of this stuff, that this is where we're at now is the result of that.
Yeah. And it's important also, I think, to support women's choices no matter what they are, as long as they really know what they're doing. Like, because some women will choose cesarean sections.
Yeah.
And a cesarean section is the birth, a sacred moment in that woman's life. And as long as she knows what she's doing, and
and that's empowerment, isn't it? Like, you know, you're taking full power, whatever decision it is that you're making. It's, you know, if it's, you know, empowering for you, and you've done all the informed choices and taking full responsibility, you know, full honor. And I think that's what we talk about, you know, about the empowering birth. No matter what birth you have, it's, you know, as long as it's your choice and you've made it from an informed decision.
Yeah, rather than being coerced and forced into by blackmail with a dead baby card or whatever.
Any last comments to wrap up?
It's lovely to have any opportunity to talk about this.
Yeah, and, you know, in answer to the question, does birth matter? Yes.
Birth matters. Is there any questions from our beautiful women joining us?
So I'd just like to ask you three, given that most women in this country are birthing in hospitals and are in the system, and most midwives and birth workers are in that system too, given that birth matters, I'd love to hear what you would have to say about birth in the system, in medical models and also in midwifery models, but our current birthing climate in this country as it is, for women and for the birth workers. I'd love to hear your some wise words about that.
And how to be with it, is that what you mean? Or what my opinion is of that situation? What is it?
How to be with it. All these things that we've spoken about, you know, that birth matters, and a birth that is kind and respectful and gentle, and, you know, everything that we've spoken about today can seem really almost unachievable or unattainable in a, you know, highly technical, medical driven birthing environment that we live in. So perhaps some, how to be with that for women and for birth workers working in the mainstream maternity services these days.
I think for women to learn to ask questions is really, really important. And especially in the before the birth, during the pregnancy, so they really know what is going to be asked of them or done to them, and they can make more choices. The women who will ask questions will have to be prepared to face some antagonism at times, and so I think having a support person at the birth is really, really important. I cannot stress, because when most men have not been at a birth before, and so they will think that the authority knows what they are doing and they will do the best for their partner and their babies. And women are not supposed to be their own advocate in labour. So to have someone who can actually advocate for them and know their choices and be like a layer of protection during the birth can be.
So you mean support person as in a doula or a private midwife?
Yeah, or someone who has given birth before and knows.
Yeah, I agree as well. Well, we know that, like, that's been studied, you know, that the various models of care, which basically are about continuity with a known practitioner, that how to do that's been already proven to be affecting birth outcome in a positive way, that the role of doulas in the system is probably one of the ways that can help the protect the mother, like Marie-Louise is saying, to be the spokesperson for her, the buffer between the system and the mum and the dad. So doulas, and I know, I know that there are wonderful midwives and wonderful doctors in the system as well. And I think that what we can do, how we can be with the system as it is to encourage and support the midwives and doctors who work in the hospitals and associated with them, that supporting them in doing the fine work that they do of being gentle and being respectful and informing the mums and the dads of what's next and all of that kind of stuff. So I think doulas and supporting the what I would call agents of the goddess on the inside, and also to help student midwives on their pathway through to becoming birth workers as well, to help them get through the experience with their sensitivities and empathy deeply still connected, so they can be the midwives that the world needs now as well. And to, like Marie-Louise said, to educate women so they're making the right choice, or the right choices for them, and to do groundwork at every place to change policies that are, not good for health and not good for family and all of that kind of thing. So I think there's lots of things we can do in the system, and I appreciate what you're saying, Judy. That's where most of the babies are born, so that's where we need to focus as well. So
there's two things with that. One is that there will be a With Women retreat in Queensland for birth workers.
That's in December this year.
December. Yep. The other thing is, I would suggest for women is to seek some antenatal classes that are not run by hospitals, so that they will get a different picture. Yeah. I mean, we run one in Ballarat called Positive Birth Meeting, and we just talk about the fact that women do have choices, which can be a surprise for some women. And then we run through the consequences of all the choices, so that then they can make a decision of what is right for them.
Emily's posed a question in the chat area. So maybe could you talk about how the fear of death often can block the way for freedom to choose? So, that's a big one, fear of death, and a fairly dominant one in our culture, which is kind of the first clue, and that fear of death blocking the way forward or freedom is something that each individual really needs to be working on for themselves. And so often what happens is a level of respect for the process and a trust in life could be the things that could help people begin to chip away at the fears of death that could stand in the way of birth.
I mean, the fact is that the woman is the one who is going to be left with the consequences of a death if it does happen. So she's the ultimate, she bears the ultimate responsibility in the choices that she's making.
And I feel like there is a death anyway, it's the death of the baby moving from the womb into the earth space, and it's the death of a maiden to mother, or a new way of being. So the two is such a portal of the birth and death process, and what birth is as well. So working through to be okay with that.
Yeah. And also kind of getting it in context too, like the you're much more likely to die driving the car than you are having a baby. So, you know, it's we so often do so many things that are so much riskier than giving birth without even thinking about it. So that's another thing to bring into that conversation. It's that, but fear of death is a thing, and it holds some clues for what beliefs we hold. All our fears hold clues for our beliefs. So if we fear death, what do we believe that makes us fear death? You know, that's the big question.
That death is a failure.
Or the end, which, you know, it actually might be the end of something and the beginning of something else. And I know that sounds easier to say than to experience or feel, but, you know, the fact is death is part of life. And our culture, it's one of the things our culture has tried to pretend it's not true.
And I think what you said, Jane, you know, it's a clue to how powerful birth is. If we're fearing death, you know, the power of birth is that there is a fear of death in our culture, and what a clue that is to how powerful this process is for a woman and her baby. Yeah. So good. I think we'll just finish off there since it is 9 o'clock. Thank you, Jane. Amazing. Just want to ask what is coming up for you and how we can contact you.
Okay, yep. So I've got a couple of websites, janehardwickecollings.com, and then you can also find out workshops on the School of Shamanic Womancraft.com. So the next thing on my agenda is the conference of the School of Shamanic Womancraft, celebrating the 10th anniversary of the school. And then I've got some workshops coming up in Mullumbimby, and I start getting very busy very soon. Something happening almost every day, it feels.
And you can find those details on also moonsong.com.au as well. Thank you. And Marie-Louise.
Oh! I have a website as well. It's called Birth, Life, Death. And we have Shamanic Dimensions of Pregnancy coming soon. And I run a student midwife circle and Positive Birth Ballarat.
Beautiful. Thank you. And for me, I've got a Death of the Maiden Rites of Passage into Motherhood workshop coming up on the 26th of October in Central Highlands, Victoria, and also offered as an online course starting in November. I do a weekly cycle report, which is on Instagram and YouTube, which talks about the cycles, so the earth cycle, the moon cycle, and my personal experience of my menstrual cycle. So really come back to connecting back into the earth. Also the School of Shamanic Womancraft, connecting with the Shamanic Dimensions of Pregnancy on October the 27th at Central Highlands, Victoria. And then I'm heading down to Tassie next year for Forest Day with Jane and Kristen for this 4 seasons journey from the School of Shamanic Womancraft. It's very, very exciting. And that's it.
Thank you, Evonne. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Jane. Thank you, Marie-Louise. Thank you, amazing women, for listening. It is such an awesome thing. Next month, we'll be talking to the amazing Elsa Asher, who's a doula, somatic therapist, and ancestral healing practitioner, to discuss the ancestral influence on birth. So if you follow us on Facebook, which is in the show notes, or the email that was emailed to you, or sign up for the mailing list, you'll receive those details. So much love and blessing to you all. May you all know that you're loved and held. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.